Good evening, dear friends. Today we are going to find out what the lumbar muscles are and what they do. One of the most important muscles in the lumbar region. But before we start, I was thinking today about what video to shoot. And in general, I was planning, of course, to shoot a video on a different topic. The previous video was about neck exercises, and someone named Dr. Shishonin wrote to me saying that I stole these exercises from him, stole them shamelessly. And indeed, maybe I thought, indeed this is Dr. Shishonin. It's him. He was the first to come up with the idea that the hand, it turns out, can be raised here, above the ear. In principle, maybe before this, no one guessed that the hand could be raised here, and no one used this movement at all. At first, that's what I thought. And then I decided to go to his channel, Dr. Shishonin's channel, and see the exercise that I actually stole from these exercises. But I realized that I didn't steal a single exercise. But then I decided to embellish the exercise so that the accusations were not baseless, so to speak, were groundless. And today, under the guise of it being Dr. Alekseev's exercise, I wanted to show you Dr. Shishonin's exercise but claim it as Dr. Alekseev's. But unfortunately, I didn't find anything to embellish. But I came across another very interesting video about osteochondrosis in swimmers, explaining how they tend to develop a more advanced and pronounced form of osteochondrosis, a full-blown mature case typical in swimmers. He said they suffer from it, especially professional swimmers. We will discuss this topic with you, and we will make a general video with Dr. Shonin. That is, we will shoot a general video, and there we will discuss what happens with swimmers. Why are they such unhappy people? And they have problems with the spine, as he believes, of course. The swimmer is well known, apparently. So now let's move on to the lumbar muscle. The lumbar muscles, in essence, are two muscles, the lumbar and the sublumbar. And they are combined into one muscle group. Whether you call it lumbar sublumbar or sublumbar lumbar, it amounts to the same thing. It starts from these transverse processes. Even the 12th thoracic here also did not fit in here. It also starts from it and from all the lumbar into this crest. Here on the thigh there is a bump. So these are the muscles. It goes here, goes here. Attaches, a very powerful muscle, such a thick one. And next to it here is the subclavian muscle. It starts from this inner edge here, from the very sacrum also goes here, in short. And the function of this muscle is very important. It is very important that it works correctly. When its function is disrupted, a lot of problems arise. And a lot of problems. When a person starts training the abdominal muscles without the participation of this muscle, for example, you could see that kinesiologists, they recommend training the abdominal muscles exactly without the participation of this lumbar muscle. That is, they tell us that the lumbar muscle is prone to shortening. If you engage it in such a way that it also works, it increases in volume and begins to pinch the sciatic nerve. They even demonstrate tests involving various movements. Then they test the thigh. And it doesn't hold, but it's not like that. If you don't engage the glute muscle in exercises where you train the abdominal muscles, it starts to weaken. And the abdominal muscles start to strengthen. And with this distance here between the hip bone and the ribs, it gradually starts to decrease. It becomes less and less like this. And no matter how much you train your muscles, especially the lower part of the abdomen, they start to protrude forward, especially this lower part of the abdominal muscle, that is a good glute muscle. It can work in its normal position, but when it weakens, it also begins to shorten. And when it begins to shorten, These two places, that is, the ribs and the hip, they begin to approach each other. That is, they should be at a certain distance. When they are at a good distance from each other, the abdominal muscles, they also slightly, as if stretch. So they are slightly stretched. And if these two parts begin to approach each other, then the muscle, it can even slightly disperse to the side, protrude forward. Very often you could see, for example, bodybuilders who seem to have abs, but when they relax, the stomach begins to protrude forward. This also happens for the same reason. That is, the muscle is large, and then they try to correct this by starting to do exercises for the abdominal muscles. That is, they explain this by the fact that the transverse muscle is weak, and you need to do a vacuum there, pull in the stomach. This is also related to the weakening of the lumbar muscle. This is also related to the fact that the lumbar muscle begins to weaken. Any muscle, when it weakens, it starts to shorten because of this. Because the weaker the muscle, the harder it is for it to work in a stretched state. That is, if the muscle is developed, then it works well here, and works well here. But the more it is stretched, the harder it is for it to perform the movement itself. There is, for example, the chest muscle. It's easy from here, the hand will turn me from here. It's harder from here, even harder from here. And the worse it develops, the less it can stretch. Because in these extreme positions, it starts to slightly tear, get traumatized. That is, from the very extreme position of the muscle, it becomes harder to work. And the weaker the muscle, the harder it is for it to do this. The same goes for the lumbar muscle. It greatly impacts stride length. That is, if my lumbar muscle is short, then at the moment when one of my legs is stepping, this lumbar muscle, it has to hold this. And the heel of my other leg, it should not yet be tearing off the floor from me. If the lumbar muscle is short, it starts to pull me very early here, pull the buttocks, pull back, does not allow me to be free in this position. And my heel starts to rise too early, and I start to fall on this leg during the step. And a person gets the feeling that it is short, but it is really short, but he wants to stretch it, and he starts to stretch. Do all these exercises. Mainly feels the stretch will be here, in this place. Because there are not many receptors in the lumbar muscle itself, but it does not feel how it stretches. Mainly here on the front surface of the thigh will feel the stretch. And the more he does this, the more the muscle starts to get damaged. And the more there will be this movement later. That is such a thing during a step, because here it could not stand it. Because it becomes even harder for her to bring her leg forward from this position. That is, the main task of the gluteal muscle is to bring the leg forward from this rear position during a step. That is, the weaker it is, the shorter the stride will be during a step. The weaker it is, the sooner this leg that stays behind me will rise onto its toes. And here it kind of hangs in the back, stays behind right here. The better the lumbar muscle is developed, the easier it is to make the movement, to put the foot, and at the same time the other foot still remains on the toe. If she gets on her toes too early, there's always this kind of tilt to the side. This movement here, and then this leg will go forward through the side. And here are these two muscles here. And if your leg goes forward during a step due to the hip muscle, it goes slightly bent forward. If the leg comes out due to this calf muscle, it starts to make a slight sideways movement. Ideally, both of them should work simultaneously. But when the lumbar muscles can't cope with their function, only one of them starts to work. And with this, the leg starts to move along with the pelvis. That is, this rotation of the pelvis along with the leg. That is, when the leg goes forward, it starts to move slightly to the side after this tilt, so that it is straight. Here it should make straight movements. And here this movement happens together with the same movement to make. And here this movement happens together with the TAS at the same time, because the subcutaneous muscle has already made it. If the movement is due to the lumbar muscle, then the leg comes forward and bent without the TAS. That is, the TAS at this point, when you put your leg, it is not in such a position, that is, it has not turned. What's interesting is if, for example, my left leg starts to step like this, the strain will be more on the right side here. Because this moment, the rotation of the TAS, it heavily overloads the supporting leg, this middle, large gluteal muscle on the supporting leg. That's why it's very important that when the leg moves from the back position, this back position, to the front position, this movement is due to the lumbar muscle, not the calf muscle. We'll find out how to train all this in the following series. Until our next meetings, and of course, wait for a new video with Dr. Shishonin.